who's talking to you at least. I had a bit of an interesting entry into Purium because about 5 years ago, a health professional, practitioner friend of mine introduced me to Purium, and for the last 5 years I've been using product in my clinic. And in the last 6 months, I've really started diving a bit more into the Purium stuff. But I work as a functional medicine practitioner and holistic nutritionist, iridology, Ayurvedic medicine, and so on. So I'm trained in a whole bunch of stuff, and I've helped thousands of people over the last 15 years or so. And today, I want to talk to you about glyphosate and sort of really dive into biomedic. And, have we all heard of glyphosate before? Before Dave told you about glyphosate, had you heard of glyphosate?
Well, not by the name, but Roundup.
Okay, Roundup. So we've all heard of Roundup. Great. So a bit of background, I've taught nutrition and environment for about 12 years in a professional setting. So I've really dived deep into the world of genetically modified foods and the chemicals that go along with that. And, I think what I want to impart with you today and share with you, I want you to take some of the information I'm going to share with you and share that with your downlines, with your prospects, with whoever else wants to listen. Because once you start scratching away at the surface with GMOs and glyphosate, you would be pretty shocked at the health effects that this stuff has. All right, it's massive impact on your health. I just finished a panel discussion a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who's an MIT researcher on glyphosate, and I've done podcasts on it, so I'm up to date with what's happening right now. But glyphosate, if you look at all of the agricultural chemicals that are sprayed on the field, so if I look at all of my organophosphates, everything else, 65% of that is just Roundup. Right, so I want to say that again. 65% of all agricultural chemicals used on field is Roundup. It is the most widely used herbicide on the planet. And what's starting to show now in terms of health effects, we're starting to show that contrary to what medicine believes and what science tells us, glyphosate does in fact accumulate in your body. All right? It's believed currently that glyphosate is water soluble, so if you just drink enough water and your kidneys are working well and you pee enough, you should just be fine and dandy, and that's really not the case. There are scientists now in the US that are showing that glyphosate is actually, we're finding it in bones, we're finding it in teeth, we're finding it in nails, we're finding it in semen, we're finding it everywhere. It is now in vaccinations. Okay, so vaccines have glyphosate. It's in children's chewies and gummies. The stuff is landing up everywhere. All right, so the only real solution to this is twofold. One, yes, we should be eating organic, absolutely. But eating organic itself is not actually enough because we're starting to see now that there is some cross-contamination as well. So cross-contamination, not so much from the farmer's field, but down in the food supply chain. All right, where there's cross-contamination in warehouses and stuff like that. Of course, glyphosate might also get blown over from the neighboring field. It's contaminating the groundwater. Some of the health implications of glyphosate. We know that glyphosate triggers something called leaky gut. Has anyone heard of that before? Yeah, everyone. I'm talking to the right crowd today. This is great. All right, so there's a protein. I'm just going to get sciencey here for a hot minute, all right? There's a protein that regulates your intestinal permeability. So if I look at my gut should be a nice, tight, protective barrier, as much as it's an absorptive surface and everything else. It's there to regulate the passage so that we can absorb nutrients in and we can keep toxins out. And what glyphosate does is it stimulates the release of a protein called zonulin. Has anyone heard of that before?
No.
No? Okay, cool. We're learning something.
That's who Star Trek fought. The
Zonulins,
right?
Zonulin. So zonulin is the sort of gatekeeper, if you will, right? And what it does is zonulin basically causes the gut to become leaky. So instead of being nice and tight, it causes the tight junctions to sort of become a little loose. And when those tight junctions become loose, now we can have the passage of foreign objects. coming into the bloodstream. This might be something along the lines of bacteria, viruses, yeasts getting into the blood. We might have heavy metals, chemicals from food. We could also have undigested food particles, which is a major trigger for, of course, food allergies, sensitivities, and so on. But something that I've been researching over the last while is the impact of leaky gut with autoimmune disease. All right, so autoimmune disease, there's roughly 100 of them that fall under this general umbrella of autoimmune. And leaky gut is one of the major driving factors with autoimmune disease. And if any of those foreign particles, right, so we might have a good example is viral infection. So Epstein-Barr virus can linger in the gut, and if you've got leaky gut, it will actually travel to other parts of the body. And Hashimoto's or autoimmune thyroiditis, what you get is you get the Epstein-Barr virus, which lodges into the thyroid gland. The immune system now attacks the virus, but in the process it also attacks the thyroid gland. Okay, it's almost like you're having a battle on the field and the ground gets damaged, right? Okay, that's just one of 100. So it's really, really important that we tighten up those tight junctions and regulate the passage of things. Another thing that happens with leaky gut is it also triggers leaky brain.
Ooh.
All right, so sorry, I just got something flying around here. The world of autism, and I'm going to get a little controversial here for a second. I don't mean to offend anyone, but something that we've started to dive into now is the role of glyphosate in autism. Okay, so glyphosate we know triggers zonulin, which triggers leaky gut. But then when you add the aluminum into the mix as well, you start to see that the aluminum triggers brain inflammation. And that is exactly what autism is. So getting rid of the glyphosate, tightening up those tight junctions, really makes huge inroads into dampening the autistic response. Okay, and this is where biomedic comes into the picture. You know, when I first heard about biomedic through the grapevine, obviously I'm tapped into Purium for many years now, but when someone first said to me, they said, biomedic detoxifies GMOs from your body. And I sort of went, hang on, that doesn't make any sense. What exactly are you saying? And then they followed it up and they said, no, it detoxifies glyphosate from your body. And that's when my ears perked up and I said, okay, hang on, there's something going on here. And I started looking at the data. I started looking at the clinical trials. I was, honored enough and lucky enough to get some of the preclinical results. And when I read the results, I started to go, okay, wow, there's something going on here. And what I want to share with you today is what these clinical results actually mean, right? Captain Obvious, when you talk about a 74% reduction in glyphosate in 6 weeks, obviously we know that biomedic is actually binding or chelating the glyphosate and moving it out. But C-reactive protein, or CRP, if you've never heard of it before, or perhaps you've just dipped your toe in the water, C-reactive protein is used by doctors and by functional medicine practitioners to evaluate systemic inflammation. So if your CRP levels are high, your doctor is going to tell you that you either have heart disease, you might have inflammatory bowel disease, you might have rheumatoid arthritis, and they actually use C-reactive protein to monitor where you are in terms of your recovery or getting worse and so on. So we know that when CRP or C-reactive protein levels are low, that's a good indicator that systemic inflammation is low. And we now know, there is so much research behind inflammation as being the silent killer, right? It impacts every single disease out there. But one of the ingredients, when I looked at biomedic and I said, wow, man, there's fulvic acid in here. And that's when I love fulvic acid, by the way. I think everyone should just be guzzling fulvic acid by the bucket, all right? I've been using fulvic acid long before I ever got in touch with Purium. So I've been using fulvic acid for a long, long time. And in my practice, whenever I put people on 10-day programs, I've actually put 1,100 people now through 10-day detoxes. So that's in my clinic. I won't go on that tangent here today, but suffice to say, I've always made a point of using ionic elements. because it's the trace minerals and the fulvic acid, right? And so when Biomedic came along and it had the fulvic acid in there and the humic acids, I mean, ding, 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 something's looking good here. And so I want to share with you some information about fulvic acid, which most people don't know about. Fulvic acid is a unique compound that used to be abundant in the soil, okay, along with trace minerals. If you look at virgin soil, like soil right here, you will see that there is probably fulvic acid in it together with over 100 trace minerals. And what we've done with farming is we've essentially over 100 years, we farmed the same stuff over and over again. We've pulled all the minerals out and then we fertilized with 6 nutrients, right? So we've actually ripped all the fulvic acid right out. And if we were looking 200 or 300 or 1,000 years ago, we would actually be consuming fulvic acid with every single meal, right? Without fail, and trace minerals without fail. So one of the things that fulvic acid does is it improves nutrient absorption across the board. All nutrients. And I'm not talking about nutrients from your gut into your bloodstream. I'm talking about nutrients into your cell. So when people are deficient in minerals, it's oftentimes not because they are not eating enough. It's because they can't absorb it. And I've seen people that, you know, one of the functional lab tests we do is we can actually see, we measure red blood cells. So we don't just look at serum levels of magnesium or potassium or whatever. We look inside the cell. And oftentimes what you'll see is you'll see the blood concentration is high, but the intracellular concentration is low, which means the minerals are not getting into the cell. So fulvic acid, get this, it takes 60 times its weight of nutrients into the cell membrane and into the cell. So 60 times its own weight, and it takes 60 times its weight in toxins out of the cell. So when I tell people that we're going to detox your cells, they usually look at me like I'm completely crazy. Like, how the hell are you going to detox my cells? Like, what are you talking about? And it's the fulvic acid, right? But what's more interesting is it breaks down these barriers. You know, when you can't get those minerals through the cell membrane, it's like your cells have a barrier up there, and for whatever reason, you can't break it down. And fulvic acid breaks that down. But it also pulls water into the cell. So you have cellular hydration, and once the water gets inside, it splits the water. So that you now have H2O becomes H for hydrogen and O for oxygen. So you have cellular oxygenation, cancer cells hate it, cancer cells hate oxygen, and the hydrogen part shifts the pH. So we're talking about shifting cellular pH in that environment, and this is part of why I love Biomedic particularly and ionic elements, so I've been using them for so long. But you know, when you get into it a little bit further, some of the stuff, just circling back to this clinical trial, one of the things that caught my eye, which most people probably wouldn't even really look at, aside from the CRP and the glyphosate levels, when I looked through it, I saw that the researchers were also testing for something called LPS. LPS, without getting too sciencey here, stands for lipopolysaccharides. And these are essentially bacterial end products that should remain in the gut. So when I check for LPS in the blood, they shouldn't be there, right? The higher the LPS, the leakier the gut. And so what we saw in the clinical trial was the LPS levels come down, right? And this is something that most people didn't really wrap their head around. But what I'm going to tell you is that when you look at the data hard enough, you're going to see that the gut barrier got tightened up or improved by 40% in 6 weeks. I can tell you right now, I've treated a lot of people, perhaps I shouldn't use the word treat, but whatever. I've helped a lot of people with leaky gut, and it sometimes will take a year, if not longer. So when you talk about a 40% improvement in 6 weeks, I gotta wonder what's gonna happen after 3 or 4 or 5 months.
What dose are they taking?
The loading dose 4 in the first month and just continuing with 2. Yeah. But I haven't looked. This is kind of where I'm heading next, is to actually look and see what's going to happen now. You know, I want to expand some of the testing we're looking at into pesticides, because I know if it removes glyphosate, it's probably going to remove a whole bunch of other stuff. If it's improving intestinal barrier function by 40%, well, what's it going to be like in 3 or 4 or 5 months? Intestinal immunity improved by 40%. Think about that for a minute. 70% of your immune system is in your gut, regulated by your microbiome. Glyphosate destroys your microbiome. It's a herbicide. So by removing the glyphosate, by tightening up the barrier, by using the lactospore probiotic, which is in fact the most rapidly colonizing probiotic strain on the market. Every time one of those spores opens up, 500 spores jump out. And you keep on going. So now what starts to happen is you're starting to talk about regulating pH, tightening up that barrier, but now you've got this probiotic strain that just goes in there and really ramps up the probiotics in your gut, which improves your intestinal immunity.